a full-on attack on public lands across the board on multiple fronts. This is actually part of a bigger structure to erode the entire thing so that it can be privatized.
The agencies charged with managing our federal public lands have been deeply understaffed and chronically underfunded for decades, even before the current administration's chainsaw approach to government. Many in the public have long been frustrated with the perceived complexity and inefficiency of public process and decision-making. Now, in the wake of the deepest cuts in the history of America's public lands, are there silver linings for the future? Are there, or will there be, opportunities for legitimate reform that might actually improve the way that public land agencies balance sustainable recreation management with resource protection and conservation? Welcome to Trail Break Radio.
Hello, welcome to Season 2 of Trail Break Radio, the Winter Wildlands Alliance podcast. I'm Emily Scott.
And I'm Annika Williams.
We're stoked to bring you a second season of recorded, live conversations from our most recent 11th Biennial Grassroots Advocacy Conference. It's a long tradition here at Winter Wildlands Alliance, something we've been doing for more than 2 decades. Every year, we host a gathering of grassroots partners from all over the country. Local advocates, athletes, conservation folks, wildlife folks, public land managers, brand partners, and other folks who care about winter recreation and conservation.
And this year, we all came together around one thing, the future of our public lands.
Yeah, and our winters. This most recent year, we met for the conference at the University of Washington's Pack Forest near Mount Rainier. The theme of the conference and this season of Trail Break Radio is From the Ground Up, Rebuilding the Future of America's Public Lands.
Our keynote speaker, Merrill Harrell, is the former Deputy Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment at the United States Department of Agriculture.
I recently read a great book, which I highly recommend, called Tree Keepers by Lauren Oakes, which is a great name for somebody who's writing about trees. And in the book, she talks about the concept of ecological renovation, distinct from restoration. So not A to B to A, but A to B to C. And for me, the term renovation is intuitive for many of us. If we think about a home, there's a structure that we care about. We want it to remain standing. There are some key load-bearing walls that are really important for the structural integrity of that place. There's also some things that we might want to improve that would make it flow better, that would make it function better, that we'd want to see, that put ourselves into it. And to me, I think that concept is also really intuitive when we think about systems. It's clear, and right now, I think it's really important that we think about things in that way. It's not A to B to A, it's A to B to C. It's clear we're not going back to the shore we were on. We're heading towards a different shore. But what is that shore? And what do we need on that shore when we get there? And how are we going to create that together? It's really important that we come to the realization and we show up to create C, because C is not going to happen on its own. We have to work together to create C. So how do we need to show up differently to create a different future? What are the load-bearing walls that we need to maintain and carry forward? And what are the things that we have the opportunity to create differently so that we can improve and better deliver on the future that we want? And really importantly, how can we find common ground so that we can create that together and we can head in the same direction and reach C, reach that shore?
I love how Merrill highlights the need to create a future for public lands together by finding common ground.
And that idea carries directly into our first panel conversation, because when we talk about rebuilding from the ground up, we're also talking about the systems that manage and steward our public lands.
To explore that, we're joined by Fitz Cahall of Dirtbag Diaries, Susan Jane Brown of Silvix Resources, and Hilary Eisen of Wild Montana, and Megan Birzell of the Wilderness Society. Let's dive into our first episode of Season 2.
I'm Fitz. Welcome, everyone. I feel awesome. It's awesome to be here with this incredible crew up on the stage. I wanted to start off with two ideas right now. I've got two boys, and they're very active, but they also play piano, and they love piano. And we didn't really put them on a course where it was like, you need to learn Beethoven, and this needs to be perfect. It's more like, here's a tool, go explore it, see what you can do with it, realize it's a vehicle. And the other day, I hear coming from the room, and there's like an idea. It's a little musical idea, like a riff, but it's not a song, right? And then that night we're driving home, and my youngest son says, "Could a kid have a song on Spotify?" And I was like, yes, they could. Like there's a way through that. And my elder kid was like, yeah, there was a kid in 8th grade that had a song on Spotify. And so we like broke it down. And my youngest basically was curious, like how this little idea he had becomes something bigger. Like, how does an idea evolve and grow? And we walked through it, like what would need to happen? Well, you need to keep working on it. You need to figure out a bridge, and you need to figure out a chorus, and you need to think about how to record that song. Maybe you'd add lyrics to it, like all these things. Like you've got this one little thing, this little seed, it's an idea, and how does it grow? And I was thinking about it in context of this, and I realized that earlier, I think it was in January, I was at an event in Seattle, and it was to celebrate the Explore Act. And, Doug Walker, kind of legendary in the sort of Northwest conservation community, worked very hard on that for decades. And Maggie, his wife, was in attendance, his daughter was in attendance. And they, kind of invited people on stage, Catherine Hollis from the Mountaineers, Rebecca Baird, who had worked on getting the Explore Act passed. And it was wild. They walked through it all. And I was like, that is so much work. And it was the same idea of, here's this little seed, and how does it grow? And it takes time, it takes love, it takes collaboration, all these things. The second idea I want to bring is that my experience, I fit into the storyteller sort of format that Garrett's laid out there. And also, I think, a little bit of an innovator. Like, I've been fortunate enough, some of that's just luck, though. And I started out in journalism. Every kind of big moment in my career was something crappy happened in the world of journalism, and I lost a job, and it all seemed like the world was ending in terms of that space. And each time in that moment, I was presented with an opportunity. And I found that through my life, that oftentimes when things seem the bleakest is when there are actually the most opportunities. Because it's all up for grabs, you have to kind of rethink things, and you have to go for there. So today in this panel, we want to kind of approach it like that. Big ideas have to start from seeds. We are obviously at a difficult time. Let's start. Let's plant some seeds. Let's go quickly through a rundown. We're gonna maybe expel some demons, because we're gonna talk about things that are like really not in a good situation right now. And then we're gonna think about, like, could we dare to dream? Could we talk a little bit about this? How could we reimagine? How could we renovate versus just restoring? How do we, go from not A to B to A, but A to B to C? And that's the kind of hope of this conversation. I would love it if each of you could do a quick intro and just kind of introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Megan Birzell. I am the Washington State Director for the Wilderness Society based in Seattle, and I also serve on the board of Winter Wildlands Alliance for the last, I think, 4 or so years.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hilary Eisen. I'm the Federal Policy Director with Wild Montana, based in Bozeman, Montana, and previously worked for Winter Wildlands for quite a long time.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Jane Brown. I'm an attorney with Silvix Resources, which is a nonprofit environmental law firm focused on federal forest law, policy, and collaboration. And I've been working in this space for probably about 25, 30 years.
Cool. Well, I'm going to dive in. Like I said, the first half of this conversation is going to be a little bit of the darkness, and then we're going to try to get to the light, but that's okay. So even this week, I think even since we met to plan this panel, it's been like, oh man, there's been more stuff that's happened. It's going on. I think at the top of everyone's mind, there are obviously the reduction in force that's happening at the Forest Service and the BLM, and just how that's changing how people collaborate. There's even a sort of alert on the travel management plan this week. But I think that the big topic right now, I think for a lot of everyone working in here, is the roadless rule, the comment period that's happening. You know, I wanted to start there. Is like right now, when we think about that sort of tool or structure that's existed inside of management, where do we sit middle of September with the roadless rule?
You want me to answer that? Okay. Yeah. As folks probably know, the administration has announced that they intend to repeal the roadless area conservation rule, which has been with us off and on since 2001. This is the latest effort of a Republican administration to repeal that rule. We've seen that with pretty much every Republican administration that's come in, including the Trump administration, their first time in office. That we also have a lot of other changes going on in the legal world, particularly to the National Environmental Policy Act regulations. And under the new NEPA regulations for both the Forest Service and the BLM, the only guaranteed public opportunity to comment is when there is a notice of intent to prepare an environmental impact statement, which is what the Department of Agriculture has announced with respect to the roadless area repeal. We may get another shot at it when the draft environmental impact statement comes out. USDA has been pretty unclear about what that other supplemental additional comment opportunity may be, when it will happen, how much time we will have. So right now is really the opportunity for the public to have their voice heard, for sure. And there may be future opportunities, but we're not sure about that. So right now is the time really for folks to engage. I know that various organizations are holding comment writing workshops. And so that is an opportunity to engage in that way. And there are also template letters out there, and I'm sure that Winter Wildlands and others can put you in touch with some of those commenting opportunities if you haven't yet had your inbox spammed with those opportunities.
I think just really quickly, effectively, what has the roadless rule done? You know, like when we think about landscapes and we kind of get a little more like out of the policy world and more into the tactile one, what has it done over the course of its 24-year existence?
Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward rule. It generally prohibits road building and road construction on inventoried roadless lands, and that inventory was, and SJ, please correct me when I mess up, but the inventory was completed in the 70s. Not all inventoried roadless lands are truly roadless because the inventory, I always think of it as like it was drawn with a crayon by a 5-year-old. It's not perfect, but generally it encompasses national forest lands that don't have roads and are not otherwise protected by like wilderness or something like that. There are exceptions. There are places that are 100% should be roadless that are not in the inventory, and there are places in the inventory that maybe shouldn't be there. So it would be great to have the opportunity to modify the roadless rule, you know, for the USDA to consider another alternative maybe, but what we have now is, you know, the roadless rule protects about 58 million acres of roadless land, as Susan Jane said. You can't build roads and you cannot conduct commercial timber harvest activities. But there are exceptions. You actually can build roads and you can harvest timber if it is for the purposes of promoting roadless character, protecting against like catastrophic wildfire, things that could cause, you know, other, you know, threats to public safety or to the roadless character. So it's a really flexible rule. The Forest Service hasn't interpreted those that flexibility consistently across the system. So like Region 2, which is Wyoming, most of Wyoming and Colorado, they are pretty open to how those exemptions are utilized, and there's a lot of kind of activity that happens in roadless land. Region 1 is like pretty tight on like not so much allowing things, but at the same time, 20% of active forest management projects that have happened in Montana since 2001 have been in roadless areas. So it's not wilderness. It is a multiple use statute, or not a statute, multiple use rule. But yeah, it's a huge conservation tool though.
Can I add two more things to that? One is we tend to focus on the roadless rule as being sort of about forest management. It's also about mineral management. So another thing that the roadless rule does is it limits what kind of mining can be done in roadless areas. And so for the recreation community, it's not just about trees. It's also about water. It's about fish and wildlife habitat that can be threatened by mining. So I think that that's an issue that I don't think about. It's not my primary focus because I'm a tree person. I'm a tree hugger. But the mining threat is super duper real with respect to the repeal. The other thing I would say is that although the roadless rule, when it was adopted in 2001, was and is a national rule, 2 states have actually gone through a rulemaking process in Idaho and Colorado. So Idaho and Colorado have their own state-specific roadless rules that are not at issue with this national roadless rule repeal. So for those of you that are in Idaho and Colorado, you're kind of golden because your rule is not going to change as a result of this repeal. But we definitely would love your voices to help us advocate against the national roadless rule repeal. And with respect to what Hillary was saying about alternatives that could be offered to the Forest Service is, hey, maybe other states should have the opportunity to go through a state-based roadless rulemaking process for those states. It's not all going to look the same. Some states might not want any sort of roadless protection at all. I think for the states of Oregon, Washington, and California, we might actually just want to retain the national roadless rule as a state rule. But there are those alternatives out there that currently USDA is not considering. So when we're going through the comment writing process, the Forest Service is looking for other alternatives, and those state-based approaches may be something that we can offer to the agency.
Yeah, I think one thing too that as I've kind of been learning about it, it's the roadless rule like kind of also came out of a concern, like a fiscal hawk concern. Like I think is an amazing part of that is that the Forest Service manages more roads than there are interstates, and this was a sort of reality of that we were subsidizing the extraction industries going from there. And, even, on this level, as they're proposing of rescinding this and there, it's like they've actually already gutted the budget for existing road maintenance in this last round of budgets. So it is, and it's kind of just a wild element. I want to kind of touch on this. Sometimes it feels like, and I hate to be the downer here, but let's be honest, is like, is anyone actually listening? Like if we were to do all these comments, write them perfectly, is anyone actually listening? Does anyone actually care?
No.
But it still matters. You should still comment.
It still matters because it will end up in the court. And so a big part of submitting comments is showing that there is strong public opposition to repealing the rule. And that will come in handy when SJ goes before whomever, whatever, we hope it's a good judge, to argue for it being illegal the way that they have tried to undo the roadless rule. But I think we're going to lose it in the meantime.
Yeah. Well, and I think one reason that it's important to have a ton of public comments right now is because when they wrote the roadless rule, it was the biggest, I never know how to phrase this, the biggest public engagement process that the Forest Service ever did or the government ever did. They had 38 public meetings in Montana and like 200 some across the country. Like tons of people weighed in. It was very much about public engagement. And overall, 97% of the people who were engaged in that process were in support of the rule. And so from a storytelling side, and I assume this is helpful for the lawyers too, we want to be able to demonstrate that that is still true. Like the public still really values this, even if the administration didn't care to actually ask anybody.
Those comments too, there were 1.6 million. It was 2000. It was like 99 to 2001. This is sort of like good working websites from the federal government. Most of those comments were handwritten too. to put that in context. It's kind of wild how much effort went into the roadless rule and supporting it and carrying it through.
Yeah, and I think that fiscal point is also a really good one. It's only gotten worse, right? Roads are really expensive to build and maintain, and the federal government and the Forest Service in particular right now does not have that budget to maintain those roads. And so we're talking about opening up roads, building more roads that we cannot maintain, that have a demonstrated ecological impact on the landscape that is bad, and that in itself also costs money. Costs money to clean water that is being dirtied by roads, for example. So the fiscal aspect of the roadless rule was a big part when it was adopted, and that remains true, and even perhaps more so today. So if anybody in the room has, sort of an economic background, that kind of expertise and weighing in with your comments that, hey, this is gonna be really expensive for the government, we don't have the money to pay for these roads, we shouldn't repeal a rule that actually, and we can talk about travel management rule too, we should not repeal rules that have a fiscal benefit for the federal government.
Yeah, and I was actually nerding out on this yesterday. And as of April 2025, the Forest Service had a $5.5 billion road maintenance backlog just for their passenger vehicle roads. So that's maintenance level 3, 4, and 5. So not the high clearance roads. And the passenger vehicle roads, or roads that are supposed to be accessible for passenger vehicles, comprise only about 17% of the entire road system. And they don't even bother figuring out what their road maintenance backlog is for the rest of the system. So $5.5 billion for 17% of the roads, why would we make that worse?
That's a quick question. This is just maybe a silly technicality question, but if, for example, as citizens, we are pulling a document off of a website or Instagram page and submitting it to our, appropriate representative, does it matter that we don't edit it? Is it just a numbers game? So if we're trying to get as many of them out, is that?
Yeah, this is not the time for thoughtful, substantive letters. Yes, the three of us are probably writing pretty detailed letters, and many other people in this room, but form letters are totally fine. It's just numbers.
In terms of resources, there's budget, there's also people there, they've laid off a lot of people. And I'm wondering to what degree can they actually implement a policy when there's no budget to implement it? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, it's pretty hard to do stuff when you don't have people or money. It's interesting, right? And the Forest Service road engineers, the people that actually know how to build roads, and we've all been on Forest Service roads that definitely should not have been there, right? So even road engineers, the agency has not had a fully staffed road department for a very, very long time. And that has certainly gotten way worse with all of the bloodletting that has been going on in the agency. So there aren't staff people to do the work. For nerds like me, there's also not the ologists that they need to even do the analysis for this rule, but they're gonna do it anyway. And so it is not going to be great work. It's gonna be shoddy. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that in 2001, when the rule was promulgated, that environmental impact statement was actually really solid. There was really good wildlife data and aquatics data and budgetary data. And that record was really solid in terms of why we need this rule. So it's interesting to me to see how the agency is going to be able to contradict that administrative record and that basis for promulgating the rule in order to repeal it. And from a legal standpoint, I don't think they're going to be able to make that case, which is why I agree with Megan that this is going to end up in the courts, and it's going to be up to a judge to decide whether or not this rule stands or falls.
Basically, the question is, well, I'll just kind of re-ask it. You guys regularly collaborate with the Forest Service or with land managers, the Bureau of Land Management, et cetera, and obviously, there was the Valentine's Day massacre. There's the fork in the road email. There's just a general. Someone said it best. It was like if you were a Forest Service ranger, you went from being on tier with an astronaut to being why am I disliked so much? On that level, it's been a big change inside of the Forest Service as an institution. When you see that, what has that meant on a day-to-day? What has the sort of massive attrition inside the Forest Service meant for you all working on these topics on a day-to-day level?
Well, not a lot is getting done because they don't have the staff that they used to have. I've heard staff describe working for the Forest Service as being in an abusive relationship. You're fired and then you're rehired. Morale is not very good. I mean, imagine if you were fired on Valentine's Day, you're brought back by some order a month later, a few weeks later. Are you really going to do your best work? Like, you're kind of traumatized. You're wondering if you're going to be, fired again tomorrow. So, these are human beings that work at the Forest Service that have, feelings and families and bills and all of the things that we all have. So it's really tough. And then in terms of what they've lost a lot of the boots on the ground. Recreation has been hit significantly. I think, I'm looking at Betsy, I think it's like 35 on the MBS were lost and like 70, including seasonals. Okay.
What's MBS?
The Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, which is the west side north of Seattle. And then on the Okanagan-Wenatchee, which is on the east side of the Cascade Crest, they've lost like 50, I believe. Another thing that the agency doesn't seem to understand is that in order to even let a timber sale, you need like an archaeologist, you need a wildlife biologist, a fish biologist. When they are prioritizing, we're gonna like keep or bring back people supporting the timber program, they're not including the ologists in that equation. So they still, under the laws and rules that they have for themselves for what they need to do to get projects out the door, they're not staffing themselves to be able to do that. Recreation is hit significantly. There's like, I think, one ranger covering most of the MBS. Is that right? The enchantments, thank you. Which is insane because no one person can cover all of that. The amount of trash that we've seen, it's not safe to be out there when you don't have, people patrolling and making sure that the trails are clear and things like that. So it's been a significant impact to the user experience and a significant impact in what they are able to get done, which is not a lot. And I just heard last week that probationary firings are back. But it's not making the news. But essentially what's happening is that when permanent seasonals get to the end of their season, if they do not have a red card, which gives them the ability to support wildfires, if they don't have that, then they're dropped. And so that's a lot of like your front office type people, some of the recreation staff, for example. And so those people are just being dropped.
Yeah, and that's definitely happening all across the country. I've been talking to forest supervisors who told me like entire districts have zero recreation staff, like, and they're like, also we're missing like key positions in every single program on our forest. And so yeah, it makes it really hard to get anything done if your goal is to actually get things done and not just break the agency so that it can't get things done, so that the public stops being such strong defenders of your public lands. And suddenly we don't care so much if they're sold off. Or if you can then make the argument that, well, we're just going to give all these management responsibilities to the state and they'll manage our public lands for us. And we're actually seeing that in Montana. The agency and the state signed a shared stewardship agreement for a 200,000 acre, 20-year project, or it's a 20-year agreement over a 200,000 acre section of the state of Montana. The forest supervisors didn't know this was happening until they saw it in the paper. And the state is saying, we'll do everything from beginning to end on these projects. We don't really need the Forest Service at all. So we're not transferring the land, but we might as well be transferring the land.
When I look at this, it's funny. I think, we've heard that term, flooding the zone, a lot in the last, 9 months or 7 months. And it's the concept of like, when you get these onslaughts, thing after thing, not just for public lands, but for like a lot of sectors of our society, it becomes difficult to actually respond because you're sort of pushed in so many different directions. And, we're talking about the roadless rule right now. We're talking about the reduction in force. But I think through time, if we were to, imagine ourselves 10 years from now, if we zoomed out, we wouldn't look at it as these sets of series of things. It actually, like when I look at it, and I'm curious whether you guys agree this is actually like a full-on attack on public lands across the board on multiple fronts. This is really when it comes down to the transfer of a shared resource, something that has, obviously a deep history in terms of, like land is power in this country. And the truth of it is it was taken in the first place. It's been there. It was put in the hands of sort of a public trust. And now when people look at it, the truth of it, when I see it, is that this isn't one thing. This is why they aren't listening to comments in my mind, is that this is actually part of a bigger structure to erode the entire thing so that it can be privatized. And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but the more reporting I do on this, the more work I do on this, this is kind of becoming clearer to me, that this is about a powerful few people who, a lot of them have actually been able to remain anonymous through the use of foundations and whatnot, have funded this kind of work for many years. And am I crazy? Tell me I'm crazy, because I would love that.
I know, I wish I could tell you you're crazy, because I used to think that kind of talk was crazy talk, but it is not in this administration. I don't see any other reason for what is going on right now other than exactly that, where we're starving the agencies and making them incapable of carrying out their mission, of being incapable of responding to the public's desires, because these are public lands. And if the agency fails and Congress doesn't help, and let's be honest, Congress is definitely not helping, Congress is part of the problem right now, then the easy answer is, well, it's just like a child. You are incapable, you are irresponsible, we're gonna take your asset away from you, and we're gonna give it to somebody who is more responsible. And right now, the states, or many states anyway, are standing up and saying, we'll take it. There has not been a right of first refusal given to tribes who, again, were the ones that we took this land from originally, which would be the equitable thing to do. It's like, okay, well, if the federal government can't manage it, maybe we should give it back to the original inhabitants who can manage it. So the states are starting to step in, or at least some states are starting to step in. And then I think because it's also going to become quickly evident to states that this is a very expensive enterprise, that they actually don't have the resources to manage these lands, that then they will be sold off to the highest bidder. And then those lands will be closed because they're no longer public lands. They will be private lands, and we will not have access to those lands. So, I used to think this stuff was crazy, but I don't think it is. I don't think it is at all. The question is whether or not the public is going to stand for it and whether they will be able to do it in time. So we are in a race against the clock, and we are in a race against, really the public standing up for what we believe in. And I think we all believe in our public lands, but it's going to be a hard fight. This stuff is going to be a real fight for us.
The other thing I would add is, I think you probably all remember the reconciliation bill from June, and there was an effort to try to literally sell public lands. Thankfully, that was defeated. I worry that since that was defeated, people are like, oh, phew, we're done with that. And oh, the roadless rule, well, but it's still public land. Right. And so I think that a lot of people aren't connecting the dots, that all of these things undermining the agency, taking away protections for public land, are these small steps to get us back to fee title transfer of public lands. And I worry that kind of by going out with the big thing first, actually selling public lands, and failing, that people who aren't paying attention think, well, that was it and it's over, and the only thing they will notice again is another similar effort in Congress, which there may well be. But even these administrative efforts are it's kind of like the death by a thousand cuts, right, approach. And so I would encourage you all in conversations with your networks and families to help connect those dots. You know, I've had conversations with reporters who don't get it and don't buy it. And I'm like, how do you not see this? So I think the more that we can be talking about this and sharing the connections, connecting those dots for people, the more likely we'll be able to protect our public lands.
Yeah, and I mean, that bill itself, even without the public land sales, was like the worst bill we've ever had for public lands. And, you know, going back to, am I a conspiracy theorist? Like, I didn't think I was, but maybe, I don't know. But it's like, was the whole public land sell-off thing just a smokescreen to get everybody worked up and focused on that so that they could pass the rest of it? And like, I had a lot of conversations with people in this room and other colleagues about like, do we fall for that? But if we don't, and they sell the public lands, like that's like, we can't run that risk. So we have to go after that thing. But then it's hard, like, you know, people have short attention spans. You can't bring it, like, it's hard to talk about all the other things. And so we were kind of put in this really hard position. And like, yes, we beat back the really, really bad thing, but there was like so many other really, really bad things that passed and so many that are continuing. And yeah, it's exhausting.
Today's episode is brought to you by Mountain Training Center, an online platform for avalanche education and mountain training built by guides and instructors who want learning to actually stick. Their solution? Online courses you can take at your own pace and revisit all season. From avalanche awareness and rescue fundamentals to mapping, mobility, and training plans for ski touring, climbing, and more. What's even better? Winter Wildlands Alliance members get 30% off everything on the site, and Mountain Training Center donates half of those sales back to Winter Wildlands each month. Join or renew your Winter Wildlands Alliance membership, then visit mountaintrainingscenter.com. It's training that supports your winter and protects it too. More info in the show notes.
All right. So I think, have we hit the bottom yet?
I don't know if you read the news yet today.
I don't know. I haven't read the
What's
news,
happening?
you know, but I think like, let's take it. There's like all put everyone in this room, let's all take a collective deep breath right now. Okay. It's a lot, right? And let's come back to that idea is that like sometimes in the darkest moments, we're provided with opportunities. And I know that sounds like a little bit like overly optimistic, but let's roll with it right now. And I think, you know, we could go through a lot of things in terms of rebuilding and renovating and, you know, and I want to point out first and foremost, you know, you said this is like a battle for us, but I think it's important to remember it's also a race for them. Like we have a say in this as a bigger institution of people inside of a democracy. Like it's a race for them too. And they're not guaranteed that they get this stuff through because right now we still have the ability to vote. We still have the ability to participate in this democracy. We demonstrated that with the public land sale in the budget bill, right? And so it's a race for them. And so I think that's like worth acknowledging as well. This is not a foregone conclusion. They've got some courts. SJ proves that not all superheroes wear capes. You know, like I wouldn't want to go against SJ, you know? And so it's like, there's a lot out there that I want to like sort of say, hey, let's take a step back. Let's acknowledge that there's a lot of bad things, but let's do a little bit of like dreaming right now. And when we think about it, maybe let's start with the roadless rule. Like if we were to reassemble it and like update it for like where we are versus where it was made in the late 90s or the late 90s basically, how will we make it better? And then maybe think about it like with the Forest Service, how might we help it rebuild into something that was more fitting of the problems it's going to have to handle in the next 50 years or 100 years than where it was when it was kind of built and, you know, the last round it was kind of built up, which I'm not actually sure when that was, but at some point it seems old. I don't know. Anyway, so let's start there. Let's start with the roadless rule. Like what, like if we were to imagine like kind of having to go back, restore, and renovate, what would be good steps?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. So, you know, the roadless rule came about at a period of time, early 2000s, when we were still embroiled in timber wars, Forest Service was doing a lot of logging, a lot of mining too, but a lot of logging. And there was yet a really clear scientific justification and a budgetary justification that continuing to log like that and build those roads was not fiscally sustainable, nor was it ecologically sustainable. And I don't think that those underpinnings have really changed. If anything, climate change and the biodiversity crisis continue to tell us that we do need these intact, big chunks of land, not only for wildlife, but also for people. Like, we need solace, and the way that we find solace is in places where we can get away from it all. We can get away from roads, we can get away from industrial activity, development, that sort of thing. And climate is eating our lunch. And in a lot of ways, climate change is also demonstrating that sometimes these intact areas are really experiencing the effects of climate change. So there may be, in some places where there are already roads, there may be justification for doing some forest restoration in those areas to help those forests be more sustainable in the future. But at the same time, we also know that those intact areas continue to be important for wildlife and for humans. So what would a reimagined roadless rule look like? Well, I'm not entirely sure. I think that the core, again, those core principles of intact big chunks of land remain valuable. But we may also want to think about some of those exceptions to the roadless rule. Is there justification for doing some thinning around communities, for example? That may be something that we should entertain. It may be a good idea to take a cue, if I can say it, from Idaho and Colorado, that maybe what we should do is a state-based approach where we set up a collaborative table with diverse interests and we say, okay, how do you want to manage your roadless areas in Montana or in California or Oregon or Washington? Or we do have roadless areas in the East, so don't forget about that. They're smaller, but they're also important, perhaps even more important because of the development east of the meridian. So I think that, sitting at a table with our neighbors, and we talked a lot about this yesterday, last night after Meryl's talk, sitting around a table and actually listening to our neighbors and understanding what everyone needs to get along, that may be a better approach than a national approach. So something to consider and to think about. And we, it is a risk. There is no question that when you go from a national rule to a local rule, you give up some power, you give up some influence, but you actually may gain a more durable solution at the end of the day. So I think that's worth considering. In terms of how we might want to re-envision the Forest Service, we were definitely talking about this last night, and I really enjoyed hearing sort of some of the report outs, and I enjoyed talking in my little breakout group about what's really important for us for an agency that manages our public lands moving forward. And I heard a lot of really great ideas. I heard, we want an agency that's responsive, that's resourced, that's collaborative, that's community-based, that stays in place. One of my big beefs is the Forest Service turnover, where if you're sitting at a collaborative table or you're working in partnership with the Forest Service, those folks tend to move out of those positions pretty rapidly. If you want to move up in the agency, the way that you used to have to do it was you had to move up. You had to move to a different district or a different forest and take a different position. That doesn't really get it doesn't build partnership and cohesion with your publics. And it also means you really don't know that land very well, and you don't know the people in that land very well. So we need, I think, an agency that's in place that listens to the people who are also in place and who use those lands. Again, it's a risk. It's a risk, but I think particularly in this day and age, given everything that's going on, it's a risk worth taking.
Yeah, I would add the culture piece, the culture of the Forest Service, this kind of militaristic, like wear the uniform, move around every few years, right? Get reassigned to a new base or whatever. Really, it makes them not a part of the communities in which they're working. It is something that the Forest Service has done on purpose because they have wanted their staff to be more loyal to the agency and to not, kind of be co-opted by the community that they're in. But as someone who does a lot of collaborative work at the local level, it is a big detriment. And I think that one thing, I don't know how you change it. I know we don't have to pass a law to do it, but to encourage staff, at least line officers like district rangers, to stay in place. When I started my career in Montana, I had the privilege of working in the Sealy Lake Ranger District with Tim Love, who was the district ranger there for like 20 years. Loveliest man ever. Got a lot of shit done because people trusted him and they knew him and he knew the land and he knew the community. And he was also the one, this was, 20 years ago, he was saying, hey, have you talked to the tribes about this? Before the conservation community had figured out that we should be talking to tribes about this. So he was really visionary. And he's like, yeah, I've had opportunities to move up. People are like, why aren't you moving up? He's like, look at the view out of my office. Why would I leave? Right? As a grizzly bear walked by, literally. So I think that is something that would really help the agency is keeping people in place to know the communities, know the needs. We have also seen, I work closely with the community of Darrington in Washington, which is northeast of Everett at the base of the Cascades. And a lot of, number one, they've seen a big decrease in the number of Forest Service staff that are serving the district. And number two, most of them do not live in Darrington. And I mean, I don't blame them. They have, they come in and they're like, okay, so I'm trying to find a place to live in Darrington. Number one, I can't find a house. Number two, there's no daycare for my kids. And so that has led to this kind of erosion in these towns of the social services that families want and need in order to move there. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg, right? But I think that if the agency, which is often or has been the largest employer in a lot of rural forested communities, could reinvest in those communities, I think it would go a long way to rebuilding trust with the communities and helping the agency be more effective.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, rebuilding the Forest Service is expensive, and certainly rebuilding it in a way that is better than where it has been is going to be expensive, but it's not anymore, or probably not even as close to expensive as things that we're spending money on these days, or that, we've decided. Yeah, it's not that expensive in the long range, big picture of how the federal government spends money. And building off a couple of things, I think going back to the roadless rule first, one of the things that the roadless rule has really fostered is this strong network of forest collaboratives. Basically, when we all stopped fighting about punching roads deep into the backcountry, we could work together, forest stakeholders could work together on, how do we manage the front country? And that collaborative spirit and those relationships that have been developed, I think directly because of the roadless rule, should be utilized in a reimagining what the roadless rule might look like. What is that option C? I don't think we need to scrap the roadless rule and start over. I think we can modify what we have. SJ had some great ideas. I think, again, the boundary adjustments, not just, doing a GIS exercise, but actually having Forest Service personnel sitting down with people who know those landscapes and who, have been involved in how those places are managed and saying, okay, what are the specific adjustments we need to make. And maybe sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small. And again, it needs to go both ways, not just getting rid of roadless lands, but also adding to the roadless inventory. And then more consistency around those different exceptions. And then as far as the Forest Service goes, couldn't agree more with what's already been said. I think one thing, we've seen a lot of forest consolidation over the years. There's the Mount Baker Snoqualmie, there's the Custer Gallatin, there's the Bridger Teton. Take away all the hyphens, right? Every time you have a forest consolidation, you're moving people out of a community. You're moving decision-making, further from a lot of those communities. Yes, it's going to, they consolidated to save money. It's expensive to unconsolidate, but the returns that you get on that are going to be priceless in terms of rebuilding trust, having relationships, having, forest personnel actually respected, because I think one reason that, forest rangers were on par with astronauts is because they were seen as like, that guy, because back in the day when this was true, was a guy. Now that's not so much the case, but like that guy knows everything. He knows about this place. He is like, if I want to know something about those mountains, that guy's the one. Now it's like, that person just moved here yesterday. Why would I listen to them about this national forest? Like, I know it better than they do. So I think that conversation has to go both ways, but I think it is really important that the people who manage the land know the land.
Those are great responses. We're coming up on time, and I want to make sure that we, obviously I can tell there's going to be some questions out of the audience right now, which is great. This is the point. So let's use the next little bit to answer some of those questions from the audience.
Say your name and ask the question.
Hi, I'm Betsy Robley with the Mountaineers. My question is, what advice you have to organizations in the room as far as like how we engage with the administration on these comment periods? What comments would be most effective? And then, if NEPA is being eroded, we may not have comment periods that we're used to in the future. What other tools do we have? Like, do we look to the courts? Do we go to Congress? I'd love to hear kind of what initial thoughts you have on how we move forward in this new world of agencies not listening to the public and not having the tools under NEPA that we're used to.
I can take a first stab. I will leave the court side of it to the expert on that. But I think we need to not just play by their rules. Mm-hmm. So grassroots organizing is huge. There's a ton of activists in this room. Create your own opportunities for commenting, right? They're not going to hold public meetings. We need to organize public meetings. They're not going to provide an opportunity to comment. Send your thoughts in anyways. And just like if a tree falls in the forest, does anybody hear it? If you send your letter to the Forest Service, does anybody know if they read it? Get your letter out publicly. Send it to the Forest Service and your congressional delegation and your local newspaper and publish it on your website. And then make sure that you say, I sent this to the Forest Service and Senator whoever and this and that. Make it so they have to listen. And I think building a case in the court of public opinion is just as important as building that case in legal court, and they go hand in hand. I'm sure many people, if not all of us, have heard elected officials complain about the litigious environmental community and how the reason we can't get anything done is because somebody's always suing us. That's not true. But when we do need to file a lawsuit, I feel like those lawsuits, it's just as important that the public agrees with the plaintiff as the court agrees with the plaintiff. So.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. I think that's great advice. And I do want to just say, I think all of us shorthand all of this and we sort of blame the Forest Service. I just want to be clear, none of what's going on now with the roadless rule repeal or anything else for that matter is actually being made by career Forest Service employees. These decisions are being made by people in the White House. Even the Secretary of Agriculture, who I call Farmer Barbie, she does not know anything about the roadless rule. It's obvious from any of her press statements that she doesn't know anything about what she is talking about. These decisions are not being made by your rank and file civil servants, who, God bless those people, because they are having such a hard time and I feel so badly for them. So give them a hug, which, is not going to stop me from suing the Forest Service. So I do want to be clear there that as we engage with our Forest Service personnel, whether that's your district ranger or your local wildlife biologist or what have you, forest supervisor, just be kind. Respectfully disagree and be like, hey, look, I know this is not your decision, but I'm here to tell you it is wrong, and here is why. And I support this rule, and I support public access, and I support public involvement. I support tribal engagement. And I'm telling you this so that you can tell your boss, so that they can tell their boss, that the public is not with you on this stuff, right? So I just wanted to offer that.
I'd also add to that, too, realizing that sometimes it does feel like, especially at the highest level, you're talking to a brick wall. And I think it's really important to think about, again, looking where the opportunity is. You have a public, you have a community, a broad community that's been engaged in a way that maybe we can thank Mike Lee for. You know, I mean, it's kind of wild. Like a lot of people are a lot smarter about public land issues than they were 6 months ago. And so I think about like something like the Mountaineers, and one question is like, where are these roadless I mean, like, could you do a trip where you went and all hugged the biggest tree that you knew in a roadless area in Washington? And so I think it's also an opportunity to think about, to the point of being like, we're gonna need to organize our own events and our own listening moments, is to like turn back and go to the community. Don't expect them to have to pass a graduate level course on land management. Talk to them in ways that they understand, like figure out how to communicate that in the same way that, because the chances are they're there for the same reasons you are. You know, it's just they do different work, they act differently. And I think that's like really important, is that as we do that, we also think about simultaneously looking at the opportunities we do have, and we have a more engaged, like outdoor conservation community than we have had in a long time. And that it also looks different and is like functioning across different silos that have not always been connected. So I would point that out too.
Yeah, and that might be a silver lining really of kind of this era, right? Is that becomes more of a cohesive, inclusive kind of base for support of public lands. I don't know, is this on? It's on. Okay. Get in there. Okay, all right, I'll get in there. So just to follow on to Betsy's question, specifically with regard to commenting on the roadless rule and kind of strategy. As you know, speaking from a tribal perspective, Tulalip perspective, I can see that we could reimagine the roadless rule that would be more friendly to tribes and more recognizing tribal rights on those lands. But at this stage, I'm just wondering what your advice, as people who strategize about these kinds of things all the time, might be for this commenting period. Do you think it's worth bringing in alternatives or how we might reimagine? Or do you think flat out, don't rescind is more effective?
Yes, alternatives. Absolutely, yes, alternatives. And in some ways, the stark notice of intent, which is we're either going to do this or we're not, is, I think, an invitation to the public to say, no, there are actually different alternatives here. And I think your point about how tribes might want to approach management of these areas is really important. The Forest Service has not, and USDA, federal government, has not shown up for tribes the way that it should ever, really, but especially right now. The tribal engagement has been almost non-existent, and I was personally offended with the notice of intent where the Forest Service is like, yeah, we don't expect any cooperating agencies for this rule. And tribes historically have been cooperating agencies. So it's kind of a big, screw you to tribes. And I think tribal nations absolutely should stand up and be like, hell no. Nope, not at all. This is not how government-to-government consultation works. You should have consulted with tribes before you even thought about going out for a public notice on this stuff, and the government hasn't done that. And there are enforceable obligations that the federal government has to tribal nations to do that consultation, and they haven't. So when we start talking about litigation, because I'm a lawyer, so put on my lawyer hat, I think tribes have a really excellent case already that what's going on is illegal.
I also think, I know that there are career staff at the Forest Service at senior levels who are asking for an alternative and have been hoping for an alternative. And so I think that comments that include calls for that might, I still think we know what they're going to do at the end of the day, but I think that there's a chance that they might have a draft EIS that includes kind of a middle-of-the-road alternative. We know people inside the agency are pushing for that, and I think having comments to that effect would help.
Hi. Okay, thank you. I'm going to probably step in the mud right now. But I want to pick up on on all the comments about engaging the tribes and indigenous people. I don't know how many people are aware of the land list legislation that Lisa Murkowski is pushing up in Alaska at the federal level, where there would be federal lands from the Tongass National Forest transfer to landless groups of indigenous people who currently don't have designated lands. Now you might ask, why is Lisa Murkowski behind this? And the idea is to take federal lands out of the roadless rule, out of the Tongass National Park, and give them to these indigenous groups who don't have designated resources, which is a great thing, except the whole idea behind it. So the incentive is for timber extraction. And it's kind of modeled on what the Sealaska Corporation has done up in the Tongass, which is a native corporation. And their only resource to get to support their shareholders, which are the tribal members, is extraction of timber, old growth timber. And there was a to give you an idea how this impacts, and I'm not blaming them, but this is the intent of a lot of this, even with giving it to the tribes, is to incentivize them to continue doing what we've been doing to the land over many generations. There was a 5,000 acre clear cut in the Tonga, in what was previously the Tongass National Park, that Sealaska did, that even the Forest Service would never do in this day and age. And so how do you balance the need for tribes to be absolutely have a right to have that voice with recognizing that the financial incentive is not to go back to how these tribes survived hundreds of years ago, but to maintain the extractive industries through a different form? And how do we talk about that in a way that doesn't, I mean, I'm a white guy, I recognize that. So it's a very sensitive subject. A lot of the environmental NGOs in Alaska have been totally silent on this because it's so sensitive, right? But I think we have to recognize that this is the incentive. And recognize that when it's happening, it may not necessarily be for what we hope it would be for, as people who love wild places. Thanks.
So this is the first I've heard of the legislation, and my 30-second thoughts on it are like, wow, I'm super curious about that and have a lot of questions. I feel like your question might be a really good question for the next panel, which is all about Indigenous stewardship and leadership of public lands, or of tribal, of lands. It's because I'm not an expert on any Indigenous issues. I wouldn't want to, speak for folks who are, but I feel like, I don't know, unless you guys have answers, I would almost save that question for the next panel, but I'll let SJ weigh in too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and I would agree. Let's talk about that again with the next panel. I'm doing some work with Alaska tribes, and there are a number of tribes up there that would absolutely want some land back, but not to do that. And so I think, all tribes are different. And some tribes, and we have this in the lower 48, we have some tribes that are timber tribes, that's what they do. We have salmon tribes, we have tree tribes, we have ocean tribes, we have whale tribes. So I think, tribes are different, and some are more interested in sort of what I would consider an industrial colonizing approach. Others are not. And that tribal sovereignty issue is really tricky. Senator Murkowski has been a great advocate for tribes in Alaska. In a lot of ways, she's a voice in the wilderness, which is weird because it's sort of like it's how I feel about Ryan Zinke. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have him to thank for killing public land sell-off. That feels weird to me. But, I'll take it. And so it is a sensitive issue. And for non-Indigenous advocates, it's something that we do have to tread into very carefully. And, you know, I want to take my cues from my tribal partners. And if my tribal partners want to, you know, do some intensive forestry, I'm going to stand back from that and let them do that because that is their decision. But that's just me, and I know not everybody is there, and I know this is a really complicated issue. So it'll be interesting to see how, if that shows up in this roadless conversation or not. Because I know, again, a lot of tribes in Alaska are going to advocate for retaining the roadless rule because it protects their cultural resources. Other tribes don't like it at all in Alaska. So, you know, we'll see where all that goes.
Well, I think it obviously, we're gonna end it here and kind of move forward. There's a lot to get through today. Obviously, there's a lot of great questions. That was a perfect segue into the next panel. So we'll leave it at that. Cool. Thank you, everyone.
As we wrap up this conversation, one thing feels clear. What we're seeing right now in public lands isn't just one policy fight at a time.
It's a systems issue. Staffing cuts, funding cuts, decisions being made farther away from the people and places affected.
The process can feel frustrating, it can feel stacked, but our expert panelists were also clear about something else. Public participation still matters, showing up still matters. Now isn't the time to disengage, even when the systems feel broken.
So if this conversation resonated with you, this is a moment to stay engaged. Visit winterwildlands.org. Subscribe to our emails and follow us on social media to stay informed and see how you can take action. We'll keep you in the loop on the upcoming travel management rule action and how you can make your voice heard.
And if you're not already a member of Winter Wildlands Alliance, joining is one of the most direct ways to support this work.
Today's episode of Trailbreak Radio was hosted by Winter Wildlands Alliance Operations Manager Emily Scott and me, Policy Director Annika Williams. It was edited by Adam Titmus.
And made possible by our panelists, Hillary Eisen, Susan Jane Brown, Megan Birzell, and Fitz Cahall. And our grassroots advocacy partners, Outdoor Alliance, REI Co-op, The Mountaineers, Duct Tape Then Beer, and Dirtbag Diaries, High Country News, Bream Family Brewers, and our host at University of Washington's Pack Forest. Our theme music is by Rattlesnake Preachers, featuring Winter Wildlands Alliance's Snow School Director Gary McClay. Additional music by Blue Dot Sessions. In our next episode, we'll continue this conversation with a panel focused on Indigenous leadership in public land stewardship.
Thanks for listening and for staying engaged in shaping the future of our public lands.